The cardinal at your feeder this morning was outside last night when the temperature dropped to 12 degrees. It did not find shelter. It did not go somewhere warm. It sat in a bush in your yard in 12-degree air, and it survived. What happened inside that bird's body between sunset and sunrise is not what most people imagine when they picture a bird in a snowstorm. And the place it chose to spend the night is probably 3 feet from where you walk every morning without knowing it is there. Today, you are going to find out exactly where your birds go when it snows. Not a general answer. The specific biology, the specific places, the specific decisions that happen in the 40 minutes before a snowstorm arrives that most people never see because they are already inside. Stay until the end, because the last thing we cover is something that has been happening in your yard every winter, and once you know where to look, you will never miss it again. The first thing you need to know is that birds do not wait for the snow to arrive before they respond to it. They respond to the pressure drop that precedes it by hours. The average barometric pressure drop before a significant snowstorm is between 4 and 8 millibars over 6 to 12 hours. Research by Frederick Tunison at the University of California, Berkeley, confirmed that birds have baroreceptors, pressure-sensitive cells, in their inner ear that detect pressure changes below the threshold of human perception. A house sparrow registers the pressure drop of an incoming storm before your weather app does. Before the first cloud appears over your yard, every bird in it has already begun changing its behavior. What that behavior change looks like is specific and measurable. Feeding intensity spikes. Birds that were visiting your feeder 3 or 4 times an hour begin visiting 10, 12, 15 times. They are not panicking. They are loading fuel. A black-capped chickadee, weighing 11 grams, needs to accumulate fat reserves equal to roughly 8% of its body weight before a cold night to have a chance of surviving until morning. Before a snowstorm that will last 2 days, that calculation changes completely. The bird at your feeder, eating with unusual urgency in the hour before a storm, is not confused. It is doing arithmetic. Research by David Swanson at the University of South Dakota documented the pre-storm feeding behavior of wintering songbirds and found that birds increase their caloric intake by up to 40% in the 6 hours before a major winter weather event compared to equivalent calm days. 40% more food in 6 hours. The feeder that seems unusually busy before a snowstorm is busy for a reason that has nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with a pressure reading the bird took before you woke up. Now here is where most people's mental picture of a bird in a snowstorm goes wrong. They imagine the bird huddled on a branch somewhere, cold and miserable, waiting for it to stop. That is not what is happening. Snow is one of the best insulators in nature. A layer of snow 6 inches deep maintains a temperature just above freezing at its base, regardless of how cold the air above it is. Birds know this. Not abstractly, through behavior that has been refined over millions of winters. The ruffed grouse does something that looks like a mistake every time it snows. It flies directly into a snowbank. Not into a tree, not under a bush, into the snow itself. It punches through the surface crust with its body, burrows in, and lets the snow close over it. The temperature inside that snow burrow stays between 26 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of whether the air above is 0 degrees or -20. Research by Guthrie Zimmerman at the State University of New York documented ruffed grouse surviving nights at -30 degrees Fahrenheit in exactly this way, completely surrounded by snow, warmer than any exposed bird in any tree in the same forest. The snow is not the danger. The snow is the shelter. Your backyard birds are doing a version of the same thing, not burrowing into snowbanks, but using snow accumulation in a way that most people never notice. Dense evergreen shrubs, the arborvitae along your fence, the spruce in the corner of the yard, the holly by the back door, trap a layer of dead air between their branches and the surrounding snow. The interior of a dense evergreen shrub during a snowstorm can be 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the open air outside it. Research by Frank Gill at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia documented that wintering songbirds preferentially chose roosting sites inside dense conifers over any other available cover during winter storms, returning to the same specific shrub on consecutive nights with the same individual consistency as their feeder site fidelity. The cardinal you see at your feeder every morning is sleeping approximately 6 feet inside your densest evergreen shrub. It has been sleeping in the same spot for weeks. It chose that spot based on specific criteria: branch density, wind protection, proximity to food, escape route geometry, and it returns to it every night. The snowstorm does not displace it. The snowstorm makes that spot even more valuable because the snow accumulating on the outer branches of the shrub adds an additional insulating layer around the interior where the bird sits. This is the part that changes how you think about your yard. Every dense shrub you have is a winter survival structure. Every conifer is a thermal refuge. The pruning decisions you make in November directly affect whether the birds in your yard survive January. A tightly pruned arborvitae loses most of its interior airspace. An unpruned one, with dense overlapping branches, maintains it. The difference in interior temperature between a well-pruned and an unpruned arborvitae during a snowstorm can be 8 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the difference between a bird that makes it through the night and one that does not. Now, here is something almost nobody knows about birds in snow, and it involves a behavior you can witness from your kitchen window if you know exactly when to look. About 30 minutes after snowfall begins, small songbirds go through a specific feather adjustment sequence. They fluff their contour feathers outward, trapping a layer of warm air against the skin. They rotate their heads and tuck their beaks into the feathers along their back, reducing the surface area of exposed skin by as much as 30%. They draw one leg up into the belly feathers, which are the densest and warmest on the body, reducing heat loss from the leg by cutting off circulation to the foot and warming it against the body core. Research by Thomas O'Connor at the University of Wisconsin documented this postural sequence in detail across 12 wintering songbird species, and found that the full cold weather roosting posture reduced metabolic heat expenditure by between 22 and 31% compared to normal alert posture. The bird is not shivering in the snow. It has converted itself into a more efficient thermal unit. The fluffed-up bird at your feeder in a snowstorm that looks cold and uncomfortable is actually running its most energy-efficient configuration. But there is a limit, and when that limit is crossed, something happens that most people have never seen and would not recognize if they did. When air temperature drops below approximately 0 degrees Fahrenheit and wind is present, the metabolic cost of maintaining core body temperature exceeds what even a well-fueled small bird can sustain through feather insulation alone. At this point, birds engage a behavior called huddling, and the physics of what happens in a huddle are extraordinary. 3 chickadees huddling together in a cavity reduce each individual's heat loss by between 20 and 30% compared to roosting alone. 5 chickadees huddling reduce individual heat loss by as much as 45%. The math of survival changes completely when bodies share surface area. Research by Susan Bott and Thomas Grubb at Ohio State University, tracking individually color-banded chickadees across multiple winters, found that huddling partnerships were not random. The same individuals huddled together on consecutive cold nights. They had preferences. They had established thermal partnerships with specific birds based on prior roosting experience. The chickadees in your yard on a cold night are not just individual birds surviving individually. They are a network, making cooperative decisions about warmth in the dark, in the snow, in the specific cavities of your specific yard. The cavity question is critical, and it is where most suburban yards fail completely without anyone realizing it. Natural tree cavities, the kind that form in dead and dying trees when heartwood rots away, are the most valuable winter survival resource in any yard. A cavity 3 inches in diameter with a 6-inch interior holds a resting temperature 4 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient air, even without a bird inside it, simply from the insulating effect of the surrounding wood. With a bird inside, the temperature rises to within a few degrees of the bird's body temperature. A cavity holds heat. A branch does not. The dead branch you have been meaning to cut down is a survival structure. The old fence post with a crack in it is a survival structure. The gap behind your garage trim is a survival structure. Research by Kathy Martin at the University of British Columbia found that the density of available natural cavities in a winter landscape was the single strongest predictor of winter songbird survival rates, stronger than food availability, stronger than predator pressure, stronger than temperature alone. The birds know where every cavity in your yard is. They assessed them in October. They are using them right now. The last thing. The thing that happens in your yard during every major snowstorm that almost nobody ever sees. About 3 hours into heavy snowfall, if you go to your window and look at your feeder, you will probably see nothing. The birds have gone quiet. The yard looks empty. This is not the birds in trouble. This is the birds doing exactly what they are supposed to do. Deep in the snowstorm, when wind and accumulation make flying energetically expensive and visibility drops, birds enter a period of enforced stillness. They have positioned themselves in their chosen shelter before the storm peaked. They are sitting, fluffed, conserving every calorie, waiting. The feeder is empty not because the birds are gone, but because moving to it costs more than the food is worth until the storm passes. And then, within minutes of the snow stopping, not hours, minutes, the yard erupts. Every bird that was invisible for 2 hours is suddenly at the feeder simultaneously, all of them doing the same post-storm fuel loading they did before it started. The burst of activity at your feeder right after a snowstorm ends is not birds celebrating. It is birds replacing the calories they burned, staying warm through the night, and calculating whether they have enough reserves for the next one. Tomorrow morning after the snow, before you do anything else, go to your densest evergreen shrub. Stand close to it and look inside. If you are quiet and slow, you will see the bird that spent the night in there. It will not move immediately. It will look at you from inside the branches, the way the cardinal looks at you from the feeder. With the same assessment. With the same history. It knows your yard better than you do. It has been surviving in it all winter in ways you never noticed. The snow just makes the shelter visible if you know where to look. Tell me in the comments, have you ever watched your feeder go completely quiet right before a snowstorm and then explode with birds the moment it stopped? That is exactly what this is. I read every single one. Subscribe for new videos every week on the birds in your yard, what they are actually doing, and the science behind every moment you have ever watched from your window. There is one more thing worth understanding about what snow does to the birds in your yard that connects directly to what you see at the feeder in the days after a storm. Snow cover changes the food equation completely. The seeds, berries, and insects that ground-feeding birds rely on. The dark-eyed juncos working the leaf litter under your shrubs. The white-throated sparrows scratching at the base of your fence, disappear under the snow within hours of a storm starting. A junco that could find food in your yard before the storm cannot find any of it after 4 inches of accumulation. The snow has not just changed the temperature, it has eliminated the food supply. This is why your feeder matters more in the 48 hours after a snowstorm than at any other time of the entire winter. Research by Margaret Brittingham at Penn State University tracked winter songbird survival rates across multiple years and found that birds with access to feeders showed measurably higher survival rates after major snow events specifically, not just generally across the winter. The feeder does not make the most difference on average winter days. It makes the most difference on the days when the ground is covered and the birds have nowhere else to go. The juncos that scratch under your feeder in the snow after a storm are not there because your feeder is convenient. They are there because your feeder is the only food source within their territory that is not buried. You are not one option among many. You are the only option. That changes what the relationship between that bird and your yard actually is. It is not casual. It is not optional. On the days after a storm, for a junco that has established your yard as its winter territory, your feeder is survival. Keep that in mind the next time you look out at the snow and think about whether it is worth going outside to refill it. The white-throated sparrow that showed up in your yard in October and has been there every day since has a territory of roughly 3 to 5 acres. Inside that territory, it knows every seed source, every cavity, every shrub interior, every wind-sheltered corner. It has been mapping your yard since the day it arrived. The snow does not confuse it. The snow reveals the map. The places the bird goes when the ground disappears are the places it identified months ago as its emergency reserves. Your yard in a snowstorm is not a disaster for the birds in it. It is a test of the preparation they did in autumn. The birds that survive are the ones that chose the right yard, found the right cavities, established the right thermal partnerships, and loaded enough fuel before the pressure dropped. Most of them pass the test. The feeder you fill is part of why they do.